Officer runs away, goes around the side of the car, and our UNLV officer then ends the suspect's actions.
Hey guys, retired Lieutenant Todd Heaton here with Humilitas First. In the last video, I shared some of my notes regarding the late Colonel John Boyd, and I introduced you to the idea of how important it is to seize the initiative, to keep the initiative, or to regain the initiative if you want to win a violent encounter. Without a doubt, the best way to win a violent encounter is to avoid it early. That's part of seizing the initiative, using surprise, speed, and avoidance. Then the armed robber, he's somebody else's problem. He's not our problem. But sometimes it just cannot be avoided. This is one such incident. I finally figured out where the quote was from in my last video. It was from Chet Richards, one of his talks. Here's the quote. Even if you look like you're being passive, you're really not. The key is to keep the initiative. Think of an ambush, for example. Who has the initiative in an ambush? Even if you're sitting there and you look like you're passive, you've set it all up beforehand. You lured your adversary into a trap. All that is you taking the initiative. If you see that your adversary is not falling into your trap, then you're going to immediately pull your ambush back and do something different. End quote. Another quote from Chet Richards, quote, if you can stay unpredictable, your enemy is always responding to what you just did and unable to figure out what's coming next. That's why Boyd believed instead of doing the most effective thing, which your enemy can easily figure out, you do the least expected thing. End quote. This is what it means to get inside of your adversary's OODA loop. Put simply, it resets his OODA loop from the acting stage all the way back to the observing stage, the observing and the processing. What am I seeing here? It's pretty simple. Why would you want to do the least expected thing? Because it resets their OODA loop. They have to then observe. The UNLV active shooter, he has to observe that the officer just disappeared from his direct line of sight, somewhere off to his left behind that squad car. So observe, process what they're seeing, and develop a hasty violent plan. Choose and commit to making that hasty violent plan happen through their actions. That process takes time, measured in milliseconds, but it's milliseconds that sometimes, especially in a violent encounter, mean the difference between life and death. I think this video gives us a better example of how we might lure an adversary into a trap, which in this particular case means to lead the active shooter into a hasty counter ambush. That place where we can regain the initiative and using those precious milliseconds gained, use surprise, speed, and violence of action to win the fight. Alright, let's work through it. The unjust shooter is dressed and he carries himself like a professor. Since he is a 67-year-old career college professor, just not at this campus. This officer, he initially reads the shooter's approach as non-threatening. See how he suddenly stops and reaches for his firearm? That is the point where he realizes this is the active shooter, and he's holding a firearm in his hand. From the view that we can see, we don't see if the shooter raises his gun towards the officer, but we do see that the officer clearly makes a split-second decision. He decides that he's too far behind in the process of drawing and shooting. That represents time. And he also realizes that he's too close to the shooter, representing distance. So he makes this split-second decision that he would rather have this fight somewhere over here, where he's able to restack some time and an angle, a blind corner. Though distance is going to continue to be a problem. But he's looking to increase his probability of actually winning this fight. So he attempts to exit stage right, left of the shooter, and he falls. But he seamlessly continues to roll away because he knows, in spite of the fall, he still needs to make this happen. He needs to make this restacking of time and angle, gaining some cover, gaining some concealment. He needs to make that happen. So once he's achieved a degree of cover, the engine block is cover. He's going to scramble to regain his feet, which he does. He's going to continue to use the police vehicle to a lesser degree for cover, but also for concealment. The vehicle's middle and rear windows are dark tint. Now I can imagine, because it's what I would want to do, that he's looking through those dark tinted middle and rear windows to affirm whether his adversary, the active shooter, is continuing to advance along the same path that he took, or whether the bad guy is going to try to flank him from behind the police vehicle. This entire experience is going to be what we used to refer to in law enforcement as tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving. So that begs the question, how much has this particular officer practiced under various lighting conditions looking through these dark tinted windows? A great time to practice this is every time you stop to get gasoline. You want to do the repetitions. You want to build in a trained response that you're looking for any approaching threats. That means people. And you're looking through this dark glass. The reason you want to do these repetitions is to build a trained response so that when you're under stress, the officer's clearly under stress here, that trained response is poised and ready. In the same way that when the officer saw that who he thought was a professor had a gun in his hand, his immediate trained response was to stop advancing, to stop closing the gap with the suspect, and to reach for his firearm. When you build in a trained response through repetitions, it becomes like breathing, where after enough repetitions, you don't even have to think about it anymore. It requires no mental bandwidth. So instead of thinking about that process, he's able to use that mental bandwidth to do some quick violent math, which told him, hey, you're too close and you're too far behind in the drawing and the shooting process. So let's get offline to the left or to the right of this shooter. That's plan B. Plan A is to see and understand sooner so that you can seize the initiative, thereby avoiding or dealing with the violent problem when you still have time and distance. Plan A don't always work out. Once the officer gets on the other side of this vehicle, he's stacked a single blind corner and he moves deep into the 90-degree cut. That's the trap. That's where the officer would rather, my youngest son, he used to constantly play this game with our family. Would you rather? Would you rather do this or would you rather do that? That's where the officer would rather have set a hasty counter ambush, and it works perfectly. If you can get 2 stacked corners deep, that's even better. You're looking to lead the unjust active shooter who got the drop on you, who surprised you, out into the deep. Your adversary is looking for you, but you're using a blind spot. You're using a blind corner. It's like a crocodile dragging their prey off to the deep where they have no footing. They can't escape, they can't really fight, and the crocodile has all of the advantages. That's what you're looking to do here. The sheriff, in one of the press conferences, he said the suspect was shot several times. The suspect got led off into the deep. He got lured into a hasty counter ambush. The officer couldn't really do anything about the distance, but he was able to mess with the bad guy's time, or timing in particular, as the bad guy wastes precious milliseconds trying to locate the officer. If the officer is looking through those tinted windows, he's going to know precisely the blind corner that the bad guy is going to round. To me, it doesn't look like the officer has done a lot of work looking through tinted windows, and the only reason I say that is because look where his gun's pointed right here. It's like, to me, it's like he doesn't know, like, is he going to come around the front or is he going to come around the back? But the officer now at least has the gun out and up. So when the unjust aggressor comes around the front, the transition for the officer was quick. He transitions to center mass target and begins sending defensive rounds, thereby stopping the threat. Don't just think of avoidance as applying to avoiding the bad guy altogether. Yes, it does mean that, but even in a deadly confrontation, I want to go first. I'm looking to avoid a gunfight by means of a shooting, with me doing all of the shooting. Timing is very important when it comes to winning both the physical and the legal battlefields. On the physical side of things, if I'm in this officer's boots, I would rather take my first shot through these dark tinted windows, getting the timing right, even though I get only one shot before that window becomes far more obscured due to the tinting film that's applied to the window. Also, even though I might not achieve an incapacitating shot with my first shot, Well, that first shot, it still may serve as enough of a distraction in the mind of the active shooter, the unjust aggressor, the bad guy, that as he rounds that last corner, or if he hesitates, as I suddenly lean into that corner, he finds himself too far behind in the process of receiving fast and accurate rounds. Before he really knows what happens, the fight's over. He's incapacitated. His threat has been stopped. Remember, the bad guy can often figure out what's most effective, but he's going to start having major problems when you start doing least expected things.